General Hedge, Mr. Rowland, Mr. Myers, and I'm Paul Summers. I'm chairman of the Benton County Audit Committee. We've got a wonderful program tonight. I will introduce our guest speaker in just a minute. I would like to call this to order. Let the record reflect we have 100% participation by members of the Audit Committee. I would like to initiate this by asking our Vice Chairman, Mr. Don Myers, to lead us in prayer, please. If you please,
let us pray. Lord, as we gather today at this meeting, we ask that you will be in our midst. Help us to make decisions that will be pleasing to you. Help us to be able to discuss the matters at hand in a reasonable way. We also ask that you shed your guiding light on the members of our military, past and present. Lord, let the meeting be productive, and that should be the case in all areas of our lives. Help us to keep you at the forefront of our minds as we do the work set before us. Amen.
Amen. Please remain standing. I would like to ask our Veteran Services Officer, Bonnie Evans, who's also a member of our committee, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. To the members of the committee, you should have the minutes of our last meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? There being none, do I hear a motion the minutes be approved? You should have a copy of the agenda. Would somebody make a motion for that the agenda be approved? Motion by Mr. Myers, seconded by Mr. Rowland. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We will dispense with all of the other matters. I want to introduce our guest speaker, tell you why we're here tonight, and so we can maximize our time. We began a little over a year ago with studying about the potentiality for Benton County with centralized purchasing and payroll in the county. Since 1982, the Comptroller of the State Treasury has recommended that all counties go to centralized purchasing and payroll, and for the last 38 years, about the last paragraph of every audit recommends that Benton County go into some type of centralized purchasing. So we decided that we wanted to educate ourselves and educate the county commission on what centralized purchasing and payroll is. So far, we've had speakers from CTAS, from the Comptroller's office. I think we started off with our dear friend and our auditor of Benton County, Jake McNabb. He spoke to us about a year ago, I think it was. We've had representatives from the County Commissioners Association, the director of the County Commissioners Association. And now, tonight, we have the Assistant Director of the Division of Local Audit as our guest speaker. Now, let me explain to you a little bit about what the Comptroller does. The Comptroller of the State Treasury basically audits about 1,600 different entities in the state of Tennessee, from municipalities to the state of Tennessee. They audit budgets that include a $35 billion budget like the state of Tennessee, or a $35 million budget like Benton County. They audit all of these instrumentalities every year. And we get an audit. We usually get it about November or December for the previous fiscal year. And basically the Comptroller is in charge. He calls himself Justin Wilson, who's also my former law partner. He calls himself the top money cop for the state of Tennessee. Remember that every county is an instrumentality of the state. Every city is an instrumentality of the state. They're created by the state, and the state does the auditing of the books and the financial affairs. Now, I sent an article to several of the commissioners and also an article to all our members. I think I sent them also to Mr. Carter and Mr. Florence. Interesting article. In Nashville, Tennessee, which is the it city, as we all know, they are having issues in balancing their budget. And the comptroller of the Treasury, Justin Wilson, came to one of the council meetings, I think it was last week, that says, basically, if you don't get your affairs in order, then we're going to take it over for you. A county can't file bankruptcy, a city can't file bankruptcy, but about as close to a receivership as you can have, the comptroller can take over the financial affairs if you don't keep them in order. Now, they took his advice seriously, and there's no indication that's going to happen in the near future, but that was Nashville-Davidson County. Did you know in Nashville-Davidson County, for example, they pay 10 times as much for debt service as our budget is every year in Benton County. Now, the good news is we don't have many findings in the audits. We do a pretty darn good job here in Benton County. Our budget committee, our audit committee wants you to understand about centralized purchasing, because eventually, if it's decided that you want to entertain the idea, then it requires a vote of the county commission. Now, I want to introduce our speaker. He understands that we're on a time constraint. Mr. Jerry Durham. As I said, he's the Assistant Director of the Division of Local Audit for the state of Tennessee. He and his department audit about 1,600 different entities every year, including Benton County. Benton County is one of them. The state of Tennessee is another one. Mr. Durham is an auditor. He's a certified public accountant. He went to the University of Tennessee at Martin. He lives in Middle Tennessee. He's got a resume that's about a page and a half long. I'll get right to the good point. He is an educator. As a matter of fact, the Association of Public Accountants voted him in 2019 Educator of the Year for 2019, Presenter of the Year. So we're going to have a good presentation from him tonight. We're going to spend about 20 minutes on his presentation. Then we're going to have questions and answers. All the questions and answers from both our committee and from the floor. We want you to ask anything you want to about centralized purchasing payroll. But the most salient point of his resume is he's married, he's the father of 3 and the grandfather of 4.
You've got that right.
Am I right?
You got it.
Mr. Jerry Durham, Director Durham, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. And thank each of you for being here, giving a care, if you will. Thank Paul for inviting me and Brett for inviting me. I'm going to talk about centralized accounting, but I'm going to talk about it backwards. In other words, I'm going to show you an aspect of centralized accounting, budgeting and purchasing, and all 3 go together, that perhaps you don't even think about. And it's all common sense. From Benton County, about the only thing that really matters is common sense. It matters where I come from and where I grew up to. Every one of you are interested in this institution called Benton County. I want to tell you about an idea that actually works. And there's getting to be less and less of those, it seems like to me. But I'm going to tell you something that really does work, and it's just common sense. This is me. If you want to contact me, this is my direct number. I always like to say that if I express an opinion, which I may during this presentation, that you understand that my opinions are my opinions. You have one, I have one, and they don't necessarily represent what Justin P. Wilson might say, or Jacob back there, or my boss, Jim Arnett, or any of the representatives of the Department of Audit. But by and large, everyone from the Department of Audit is going to agree with everything I say in here, unless I tell you it's my opinion. I want you to answer this question. This is an actual fraud case in Tennessee. How on earth could this happen? And it really did. How could one man divert cash deposits totaling $338,000 for his own benefit? Pretty good question. How could one man replace most of that cash in separate deposits, that's what we call lacking, and this not even be noticed? Pretty good question. How could one man still manage to deposit some of it back but keep over $69,000 of it and nobody know? How could one man prepare a check, sign the check, and prepare a fake invoice, send one of his employees to cash the check and bring the cash to him? That shouldn't be allowed. That shouldn't work that way. How could one man add 3,000 hours of comp time to his leave balance even though city policies prohibited the employee from accruing comp time? That would amount to 97 hours per week, 14 and a half hours per day for a 7-day week, or 19.5 hours a day for a 5-day week. Any of you work that long? Some of you farmers do, I know that, I get that. But not most people that has a small job in a utility. How could one man add approximately 2,000 hours of comp time to his leave balance for the previous 2 years? That's a total of 5,000 hours to his comp time. And did I mention that he had another job on the side that he wasn't authorized to have? And then he began to pay himself all that leave. What went wrong? Because I'm telling you, it doesn't make much sense to know that something went wrong there, right? Let me tell you what went wrong in our fraud case. There was no internal controls. There was no what we call segregation of duties, which means one person is not in charge of everything. I'd be willing to bet you that in Benton County somewhere, unless you've taken the advice of auditors or your mayor, that there's someplace out there that somebody just basically does it all. Well, who is responsible? Obviously, the thief is responsible, right? But then again, you think, but who allowed the thief to have that much access to the records and to the cash and to the leave records? So somebody else actually has some responsibility and is somebody in a position similar to the ones you occupy. How could all this have been prevented? Or could you even prevent it? And the answer is really simple. Yes, with the most simple, basic internal controls. Every single thing that I showed you would not have been allowed to happen. But aren't most frauds more complex than that? You want to know the truth? No, they're not. Not in Tennessee anyway. If you get up on Wall Street and you're talking about stock trading and securities fraud, yeah, it's a lot more complicated. But not in the state of Tennessee. It's just basically somebody took some money that somebody collected and somebody made a fake invoice up and stole some cash from disbursements. That's it. And you can fix that. So let's think together how you fix it. Here's how fraud occurs. It's what we call the fraud triangle. Most often you're going to have some kind of pressure on the employee. Then that employee is going to have to rationalize why I should go ahead and take some money that doesn't belong to me. And then if that employee has the opportunity, then that sort of finishes the triangle. What might a pressure be? Well, let's say that somebody has gone through a really bad divorce and they're about to lose their home, okay? And then they rationalize, well, you know what, I've been working here for 10 years and I've only got 2 raises and I owe other people that got more. So I'm going to pay myself. Or I'm just going to borrow it just to get by this month. And so you got that pressure, you got that rationalization, and if you have a door of opportunity under those circumstances, a lot of people will steal. And there's an association that I belong to called the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and basically they say, given those circumstances, about 80% of people are potential thieves. If you want to see what I'm about to show you, you can go to this website. And what I'm asking you to look at is are you sure we're really convinced that this could happen to us? Let me show you. This is 2019. Are you sure this couldn't happen to you? For example, there's the city of Adamsville, the city of Spring Hill, the gas board, the University of Middle Tennessee, elementary school, trustee's office, a PTO, a Central High School, the town of Unicoi, Jackson Madison County Hospital. You go on, you got another PTO, a fire chief, a high school, a parent-teacher association, a volunteer fire department. What part of government is not on this list? And frankly, almost none. You go on to 2018. A utility district, a high school, a school department, a volunteer energy corporation, A co-op, in other words. On here, there's a police department and a sheriff's department. Again, another volunteer fire department. Here's an apartment building that is funded with federal money. If you just go on a public library, there's no part of government that's not subject to this, and it's simple to fix. Is there more fraud now than in the past? When you look at that list and you say, wow, maybe so. I really think there is. I think we've gotten ourselves into a position in our culture to where people think they deserve more and they want more, and yes, I think there is. Especially, there's a lot more money in government these days, and people seem to think that government money is just something that's theirs. But in my opinion, yes. In my opinion, and notice I said in my opinion, whenever a society accepts that truth is not absolute in some sense, that I get to make up truth for myself, then each person develops a rationalization about what is right and wrong, and under that pressure, they may steal if that opportunity is there. So here's the common thread. And which of these can we control? Can we control the fact that somebody got a divorce, is in a terrible financial condition? I don't believe you have any control over that. Can you control somebody's rationalization, what they think? In other words, I deserve more than what I'm getting, or I'll just borrow money that doesn't belong to me. Can you control that rational thought, or actually irrational thought? And the answer is no. What part of the fraud triangle can we fix? That's the only one. Right there. That's it. And honestly, that's what your job is, or at least that's a part of it. It's not just the budget, but it's to make sure that your county and the assets in the county are safeguarded. Now, you look at this right here and you see 3 beautiful children. But that's a simple example of an internal control. And you notice they're even turned around backwards. That's even more control. They're all strapped in. That's to obey the law and to protect those children. And if you've ever strapped 3 children into the car seats and backwards, you know that's a chore. And it takes you about 6 or 7 minutes of time to accomplish that if you can do it in that time. These kids look fairly pleasant. Sometimes my kids don't want to go in there. And I have to require them to. Why? Because that's a safeguard. It's an internal control to keep them safe. Now, this is my daughter, Dixie. This is my grandson, Rhett. Now, this is them driving down the road one day, and Rhett was strapped in the back seat. But Rhett's really, really strong for his age. He's 3. And one of these days, you're going to hear of a man, or a young man, and his name is going to be Rhett Gerke. Keep that name in mind, because he's going to be playing in the NFL. He's just stout. Anyway, his little fingers can punch those buttons, and he's strong enough that he can do it better than I can. He's really, really strong. So, they're driving down the road. The internal control was in motion. All of a sudden, there he is. And see how happy he is that he got out around those internal controls? So what happened there? The internal controls were overridden. And in our example, if there were internal controls, that man who stole all that money overrode those internal controls. Who else might be responsible? The thief is certainly responsible. Anybody that didn't put the internal controls in there is responsible. Who else might be responsible? Well, if you're an employee and somebody is telling you to cash a check and you know something's wrong and you don't tell, you're responsible as well. However, what if your job is at stake? And that brings a whole new light on it. One of the things that you can do to help your government work well is make sure that people have an avenue to report fraud. Anyway, we'll talk about that more. So kids are a lot of trouble. You got car seats, changing diapers, shoes and socks. You just simply can't keep shoes and socks on kids. So you put cabinet locks and stair gates. The problem with that is you also need to get in the cabinets and go up the stairs. You have all kinds of special foods and diets. You have doctor checkups, all kinds of immunizations. You listen to children's videos over and over and over and over and over. And my least favorite chore, cleaning up after stomach viruses. Now, why on earth do we put all those effort into our children? Because we care, right? We take care of things we value. I showed you that picture of your courthouse. That's what you value. That's why you're here tonight. So you take care of it. Are you sure? So when I showed you all that list of one after another types of entities that fraud had occurred in, if there's anyone in the room that's simply saying, it could never happen here, I don't know who told you that lie, but it's a flat out lie. If you don't put internal controls in place in every aspect of your government, I promise you, either somebody is stealing from you right now, or they will steal or have stolen in the past. So are you sure? Have you thought about it? Have you considered the animal control shelter? Anywhere there's money being collected and only one person is there, for example. That's just one element. Now, let me show you this. Now, this is my daughter's home. That's my daughter's vehicle. This is my wife's vehicle. Right down here is a street. It's about 50 feet from these vehicles, okay? So, if a car was driving by, what could they do? They could stop and get everything out of those cars. Now, if my wife was just going in for 30 seconds, probably couldn't happen. But this was the scene after 3 hours. Both my daughter and my wife went in the house and left the car doors wide open in Memphis, Tennessee, and anybody could have walked up there and stolen. Once again, I ask you this simple question. Whose fault would it have been if somebody had gone and stolen every single thing out of both vehicles?
Yours.
You got that right, Judge. Ultimately, it would have been mine. Although I've told them not to do this over and over and over. They can't remember. You can see they come from the same genetics, okay? So anyway, the thief would have been responsible, and then somehow I would have been ultimately responsible. Who else would have been responsible besides me? My wife and my daughter shouldn't have left the car doors open. They should have shut the trunk. They should have locked the doors, and they then should have went in the house. They bore some responsibility. Thankfully, nothing was stolen. Internal controls work, period. They're a lot less trouble than kids are, and they cost a whole lot less too. And in some instances, they cost zero. That's how simple and common sense they are. There's a law that says you got to do that, just like putting a kid in a car seat. You're supposed to do it. There's a law in Tennessee that says Benton County is supposed to have internal controls. So I trust that you've tried to implement something. If you get federal money, there's an even stiffer law that says you've got to have internal controls to guard that federal money. Here's the internal control components that they will teach you in school that every accountant or auditor knows. There's a component called the control environment. There's then something called a risk assessment, something called the control activities. That's like the segregation of duties. Then there's information and communication, making sure that all the books and records are kept right and communicated to people in charge, like yourself. And then there's the monitoring. Then it sort of starts all over again. It never ends. It never stops. You are always constantly in this cycle. You're not necessarily going to be able to hear this. If we can't, we'll just stop and I'll explain what I'm trying to make. Here's an old video clip from Andy and Barney. See if you can hear this.
Sheriff, I have something to say.
Can you hear that? Okay, we're going to stop. Now, have you ever, that one is one, there's about 3 scenes in Andy and Barney where Barney tells Andy in all 3 scenes. This is one of those. Barney tells Andy you got to nip it in the bud. And if you could have seen that, you would have appreciated it. Nip it in the bud. Now, what had just happened was that Barney was demonstrating to 3 deputized individuals there in the community that they were not trained in firearms. So they're internal control, you're not going to let them have a gun. But Barney was taking out his gun, and he was supposed to be trained, right? And he stuck it down his holster, and there goes the gun. Now, if you know anything about that story, you know there was an internal control that was supposed to be at work there. Andy wouldn't let Barney do what? He only gave him one bullet. Where was that bullet supposed to be? In his pocket. Where was that bullet when he put it in the holster? It was in the gun. Now there's two possible scenarios there. Number one, Andy didn't do a good enough job of making sure Barney hadn't put that bullet in his gun because they was going out to a parade and he just didn't do it. Or else Barney overrode Andy's internal control intentionally and put that bullet in that gun because he was feeling powerful going out to supervise that parade. But Andy knew he had to have that internal control. In that case, it didn't work. Now, this is you. Everybody in this room, you're part of the controlled environment. Everybody considers the controlled environment to be the most important part of an internal control scheme. And that means that everyone here is responsible in some way for making sure Benton County works right. And that's what internal controls do. Things like conflict of interest policies, a code of professional conduct, every theft of every size being brought to the attention of your board, internal audit, your audit committee, nepotism policies. I know this is a touchy subject, but people just don't need their relatives working with them. I can tell you horror stories about that. Internal audit, if you can. If you got enough money, that takes some money. Audit committee, you got. Fraud reporting method or hotline, harassment policies, discrimination policies, management, that would be the mayor's office, the highway superintendent, and director of schools, is primarily responsible for coming up with that internal control scheme, but the governing body remains ultimately responsible for making sure they've done so by asking, let us see your internal control policies. Something like that. So, this is the most important thing, and it's you. Then there is a risk assessment. You simply say, well, where could something go wrong? If I give somebody a credit card, do they misuse it? And the answer, by the way, to that question, 100% yes. And many, many frauds are based on credit cards. Control activities, very important. That's what, anytime you see a finding, it's almost always some control activity that's not working. Information and communication. How do you know as a county commission that when somebody presents you with a report and you're supposed to read that report is right? If you don't have some internal controls, you don't know. Monitoring is making sure that it works over time. If you don't monitor it, it will disappear. Another good way to look at internal controls is that internal controls are a simple way to make things go right and prevent things from going wrong. We spend a lot of time sometimes fixing things when we could spend time just not having to fix it. Anyway, so here's an inconvenient truth. Like it or not, it's just a truth. People will steal, and they'll steal from you and your government if you are not making sure they don't. That's part of your job. Now, here's my 4 grandchildren. You may not be able to see them very well, but you can at least tell they're cleaned up and they're smiling, right? But there's another side of my grandchildren, and they kind of look like that. This is a Halloween. There's a little bit of demon, there's a little bit of misconduct in every single one of us. You give somebody that has that pressure and that rationale, the opportunity, and some, even a lot of people will take it. Benjamin Franklin said there's no kind of dishonesty in which otherwise good people more easily and more frequently fall than that of defrauding the government. I bet you wouldn't believe that. I'm here to tell you, he's telling you the truth. Benton County gets that audit finding that the judge was talking about. Here's a sentence in there that you probably don't pay any attention to. This centralized system of accounting would significantly improve internal controls. If you want to know more about that, I'd be glad to talk with you about it. For the time being, thank you for allowing me to visit. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you. I think I told you at the beginning, this is an idea that'll work, and it's just common sense. And so I know as a matter of fact that that is the truth. So here's my contact information again, if you want to write it down. Judge?
Questions of Director Durham?
Not from you, Jay.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Durham, as far as, do y'all track data that would say, did any of these happen in systems that have adopted centralized purchasing? Because nothing is completely 100% maybe, infallible, I would say, but what's the ratio? Or do y'all track ratio that they had 81 Act, 57 Act, whatever, versus those that had a centralized purchasing or centralized system?
We do. We've noticed a decrease in all types of audit claims in governments that have a centralized system of accounting. And there's a simple reason from that. You've got a financial person that's in control, helping to establish the internal controls, looking at it not from a my district, my budget, your budget, but looking at it strictly from an accounting perspective. Does this make sense in terms of accounting? And in order for that to work, you have to hire somebody that literally does have some accounting background. But yes.
As a city or county with centralized purchasing in place, have they ever had a case of fraud occur?
Absolutely, without a doubt. And they have findings too, but just not as many and not as big because they're found out.
Always come down to the director of centralized purchasing. Is he the person responsible?
He, along with the mayor, the highway commissioner or highway superintendent, and the director of schools, because they're going to get together and they're going to agree on these types of controls. But my way of thinking, and I just don't see how you can deny it, you can try if you want to, if you had one set of internal controls that applied across this county and everybody understood, it seems like to me that would be a better system than having 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 different systems of internal control. I just don't see how that's debatable, but I'm sure I'm not speaking for anybody except myself there. Yeah.
Okay. My understanding is that all Benton County offices have internal controls that the audit committee, the auditor helped to develop. Different offices are set up with different personnel. How would that even work? I mean, like, right now the animal shelter accepts money, the sheriff's department accepts money, the library accepts money. Would there be only one place that people could go to drop money off? I'm not sure what changes would need to be made in order for us to have a centralized accounting system.
Well, that's a really good question, honestly. Because, for example, the Highway Commission does not have an animal shelter. Director of Schools does not have an animal shelter. The animal shelter is going to come under the control of the county mayor. So, not everybody has the same situation, but everybody that does have a situation where money's collected should have the same kind of internal control. And right now, if the Highway Commissioner or the Director of Schools or the county mayor sees things a little different and don't think that we need any internal controls at the animal shelter, then they're not going to be there, whether that's a good idea or not.
Well, the animal control is under the mayor's office, and I'm sure that the auditor has suggested whatever internal controls they need. How would it differ how would the animal shelter having whatever internal control the auditor recommended, the sheriff's department using whatever internal controls the auditor recommended, differ from it being a centralized accounting system?
We continue to write internal control findings everywhere we go. So they're not thoroughly implemented, okay? So, animal shelter is not a good example because it falls under one office. Let's say credit cards. Let's say that everybody has a credit card in the 3 offices. Would it make sense that all 3 offices have the same credit card policy and that be a well-developed, sensible policy for use?
Yeah.
That makes sense because they all 3 have it. So the animal shelter is a little bit different. And then again, there's going to be something different at schools. For example, the bus garage. You think you need any internal controls over a bus garage? You better believe they do. You say, but there's no money collected there. No, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of parts and inventory and people and their salaries going through there. Well, should you have some kind of policy that relates to the way people do their jobs and how they're going to conduct the use of supplies, for example?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it makes sense, even though it may be a little bit more difficult to understand. And we do point out internal controls. But frankly, I don't know any place that's got completely accurate internal controls. And I would hope that we'd be, just all of us would be more conscious. Because I'm just simply saying, if you saw everything that we see, and if you got every notice of every fraud, and if you knew there's another list exactly the same length of more fraud that we can't even get to, then you would be saying, how can we do more rather than less? And I think more is important. I think more is our job. And personally, I don't think anybody that steals a dime of basically, they shouldn't have a job, period. I can't stop everybody from stealing a dime. And auditors, frankly, are not even worried about a dime. In fact, we're not even worried about until it gets to a material level, which is hard to define. But still, people in this room should be worried about it, even if I'm not worried about it. I don't know if that's a good answer or not, but that's what I've got, okay?
Other questions? I have.
Yeah.
What is the difference between the way Benton County is doing it now and the 1981 Modernization Act? What's the difference between those two?
Well, it's what is happening in about 50% of the counties across the state. So we're not telling you that everybody is implementing a system of budgeting, purchasing, and accounting. It just hasn't happened yet. But for those counties that have, then you have a finance director. And the finance director is somebody whose main job and his only concern is doing things right in terms of accounting, budgeting, purchasing, and internal controls and such. He's not a politician in any sense. He's not worried about districts, he's worried about every district. He's not worried about just the schools, he's worried about the schools, the highways, and the county mayor's office. In other words, are we getting the best price on paper? Now this is a simple example, but I'm trying to be simple here tonight. So the schools buy their paper from one company, highway doesn't need much, but they buy it from another company right down the street off the shelf. And the county mayor's office needs it, so they go out and they buy it from Quill or something. And one pays one price, another pays another price, another pays another price. Why shouldn't everybody in the entire county be paying the lowest price possible for paper? And that's just a tiny, tiny little thing. But that person in that office is not supposed to be worried about the person who has a little store down the street that is close by. They're supposed to be worried about, can we buy things in an economical way? Can we account for that purchase in the way that governmental accounting says you're supposed to? So you have 3 offices, Judge, and each office does things their way. Now, let's say that every one of them are just as honest as they can be. We're going to assume that. Here's what I can do. They're still going to do things different. And there's going to be some lack of economy of scale, and there's going to be somebody that's doing things better than somebody else. And that may be the schools. I don't know. But that finance person is going to jump in there if you will let him do his job. That's another thing. If you're going to hire somebody to be a finance director who is qualified, let him do his job, or her job, by the way. Let him do it. And don't bog them down with all of the rest of the politics of the situation. Just simply let them do what is right for the government of Benton County. And frankly, if that's not what you're going to do, then maybe you need to think about it more. And by the way, Judge, just for the sake of everybody's understanding, the 81 Act is a little bit outdated. And so our office actually recommends another act that's been updated, say, for the checking system and so on. And it's just a private act. I'm sure Brian and maybe even.
Is that the 40-page private act?
Yes,
that,
that's what I'm talking about.
Brian, and also Jake Summers?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it does almost exactly the same thing, but it's just got some of the nuances that have changed since 81.
As I understand it, in the private act, which is what you're really recommending these days.
That's what I recommend.
It has to obviously pass by 2/3 vote of the county commission and, of course, passed by the legislature, which is usually not a problem.
Correct.
But, if my memory serves me correctly, there are two ingredients. The lack of any one of them, that centralized purchasing and payroll is doomed to fail. One, as I understand it, this is the opinion of several other experts, and I'm asking you if this is also okay. Number one, you've got to hire a competent finance director who knows what he or she is doing, and you've got to pay them at least what the county trustee makes. Number two, you've got to have the buy-in and the cooperation and the backup of your major department. If you don't have those, forget about it. Right or wrong?
100% correct. I couldn't have said it better. And I'm glad you said it, because eventually, if you'd given me time, that's exactly what I would have told you. And let me give you an example, okay? You can hire a finance director, and he can come from a manufacturing company, and he can be sharp. But frankly, what you need is a finance director who is sharp and has a government background. Because if you think manufacturing and government are the same, not even close. You can hire somebody from a hospital, brilliant person, but they're going to have to learn from ground up. And somebody like the mayor and the highway commissioner and the director of schools is going to have to teach them everything. Governmental accounting is so different that you really do, if at all possible, need somebody with an accounting, governmental accounting background. You say, but they're a CPA. I really don't care. Okay? I'm telling you that if you get a CPA and they come from a small CPA firm and they've done tax work for their life, that in the beginning they're not going to be qualified to do finance director job, because they have to learn everything from the ground up. And governmental accounting, believe it or not, is pretty tough. It seems like it should be simple. Jake and I would agree, it should be simple. I'm just telling you, in today's world, it's not. And we're talking about hiring somebody to manage $35 million. Would you want somebody qualified to do that? Or would you want to get your friend down the street who used to work at the bank? The guy can learn it, you know? But at the same time, it's $35 million, and you'd like to have somebody that sort of knows a little bit about government from the beginning. Even cities and counties are different, but I think somebody from a city background or a county background or somebody that's been from other states and counties or cities would work fine. It's just got to have that governmental feel for how things work. The budget, for example. I mean, General Motors is not going to have to pass a budget by a county commission or a board of directors. If they want to go out and buy a Learjet, they just go out and buy a Learjet. They don't take bids. But in government, you can't do it that way. So if we had a bid law here in Benton County, should it be the bid law for the county mayor's office or the highway commission or the school? Why not have a set of controls that says we're going to do our controls over our bid process the same across the whole county?
There you have a question.
I just want to say, if you'll indulge me just a minute, and I appreciate you coming, Mr. Durham. We've had a series of multiple discussions about this. They know my feelings on this. I'm one of those is about setting up systems that are built for success, or at least positioning Benton County for success over time. These are the main players, me, Mr. Carter, Mr. Florence. We're the directors that run the financial components of this county. And I already know, he runs a great highway department. Mr. Florence runs a great school, but he's got 300 plus components to his school called employees, that he's worried about. And, Mr. Carter here, same way, they've got their concerns. And all I do is, as far as challenging our county, challenging us as what we are the future of Benton County making decisions, is how do we want to be as a county down the road. Right now, the future schools director, the future highway director, the future mayor, when we're long gone, are going to be very digital. They're going to be able to run systems that are more advanced than what we've grown up. And I look at this centralized system as being an opportunity for us to position our county for the future. Not necessarily, there's learning pains, there's transition pains. We'll work through that. And I'm not going to try to force something and impose something that you're not ready to embrace, because we should all be embracing, really just working out the kinks as they go. But like I said, maybe not 2020, 2021, 2022, but come 2023, 2024, 2025, we need to be thinking, do we want Benton County to be functioning the way the future is going to go? Because I see the day that this is going to be a requirement statewide. I'd like to get ahead of that game. I'd like for 94 other counties in Tennessee to look at Benton County and say, man, those guys got on it early, they adopted it and embraced it, and they made it work. And like Mr. Gailey said, most people he works with, when they incorporate this system, usually two to 3 years later, they're going, man, how did we make it without it? How did we not incorporate this earlier? So as the directors, the department heads, elected officials, I challenge y'all, maybe we need to just talk about it and ease into it if you feel like this is the future where we should be going. I appreciate your time and your efforts. I appreciate the audit committee's efforts.
We have time for one more question.
Well, it's not a question, but in my 7 years as director, my 25 as educator, my phone never went off in a meeting. My biggest pet peeve in the world is drunk, so I apologize.
We won't hold you.
I would ask this question, and I apologize, because that is my biggest pet peeve ever, and I usually don't even bring them to a meeting, but I've asked this to everybody that's here, so and I've got a lot of friends who are directors of schools, and my philosophy on centralized purchasing, from what I've seen from other directors, if they've had centralized purchasing, and if you could drop a genie in Benton County and say, we're going to start a new county, it really seems to work well in those counties. But the ones that switched over, I'm not going to say all, but it seems like it's very tough. And as the mayor said, I guess growing pains. But the question I've asked everybody, I know the comptroller recommended, but we're still only looking at 24 districts, and there's not a district in the state of Tennessee the size of Benton County that's centralized purchasing. And so, an answer I get is fear. And I just, what's your opinion on that? And from starting your presentation, I understand it's an opinion.
Yeah, good thought. I will give you my opinion. My opinion that every government that doesn't want to centralize the county is scared. Every single one. They're scared of a lot of things, but one of them is, I've got it going good, it's working, why break it to fix it again? And that fits in my mindset really, really easily. But all I can say in answer to that is, when it works right, it's really, really good. Getting working right, I'm sorry, it's just going to take a little time and effort. But here's my own personal philosophy. Again, I'm not speaking to a comptroller. If I could have an office that would run my payroll for me and take all that payroll tax deposit stuff off me and off my employees and off my back, I would take them up in a heartbeat. That's what a finance director is gonna do. You're gonna turn in the same time you've always turned in. You're gonna turn in the same salary that you've always turned in. They're just gonna take care of payments for you. And worry about all the headache that goes along with it. And man, I take that any day of the week. Just have that burden out of my office, off my employee's plate, and off my back. Because if the IRS comes calling someday, it's on your back. Even though it's a simple mistake, it still falls on your shoulders, and it would fall on somebody else's shoulders otherwise. So I see a lot of things that work well. If you do it, fear is the main thing that keeps you from it. A difficult transition period keeps people from it. I don't even know governments that go into it, 5 years later, they back out of it. Well, they didn't do what the judge said. First of all, they didn't let the hired man who was qualified do his job. And then, the offices never did agree to it in the first place, didn't want it, hated it, and fought it all the way. And if that's going to be the case here in Benton County, I encourage you not to do it. If you want it to work, it will work, and if you want it not to work, it won't work. That's how simple it is.
Thank you so much. You're welcome. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Are there any reports from the committee?
I have a report, if you want to hear the reports that you had asked us to, in pairs to check with the departmental officials. These are the concerns. You had asked us to check with them for purposes of finding out what their specific concerns were. From Director Florence, I just outlined these. Director Florence's primary concerns with the adoption of centralized purchasing are the school system comprises over 60% of the